So this is the really challenging after lunch presentation. So I've interspaced the presentation randomly with crash videos. Nobody was hurt in making these crash videos. I just want to put that out there. And I also want to put out there that this, security issues is really important, but I'm going to bring some humor to it. It's kind of how we've been in business for 28 years, involved with this issue in a number of different facets that typically we play a supporting role. So typically you don't want your subcontractors on stage talking about your projects. So I'm going to minimize photos of some of our projects, more for confidentiality purposes. There's a strong piece of confidentiality throughout this presentation, but I'm all excited you're here. So maybe to start out with, to learn more about you, could I have a show of hands of all the general contractors in the room? Okay, most of you. Engineers, engineering companies, got one over there, two, maybe. Hybrid, kind of like us. Any owners, owners out there? Great. Procore, software. Great, over here. Anyone else that I'm not, anyone else that doesn't fall into any category? Speak up. Okay, so super excited to present this, something we're pretty passionate about. I want to introduce my brother, Greg Sloan. He's been my partner for 28 years. We're actually a family business. We've been around for 28 years, and there's 4 brothers that actually that manage the company, so which is a pretty amazing thing in itself. Give a hand for these guys. They are amazing. If you don't have them on your side, I mean, just looks easy. It's not. So I'm gonna just real quick go through our agenda for today. What I'm going to do is we're going to talk through some of these things. If someone has questions that you really want to ask, go ahead and ask. We're going to do a combination of story. We're going to do a kind of a combination of big picture thinking and some ideas with hopefully some practical things that you can take home with you. If you want more information or would like some of this slide info, just let me know. Just give me your business card and I'll make sure you'll have some of the information that pertains. So we're trying to do a mix of story and practical and big ideas. So what breaks your heart? One of the things I love about this is that what breaks our heart is what we're drawn to. In the security world, in our family, we've been involved in the security world for 4 generations. And my grandpa used to hate, if paving wasn't done right, or if things weren't built right. I mean, you heard about it, you hear the passion. And for us, what breaks our heart is when people aren't safe, when there's not that security that people deserve. And one of the things you're going to hear about is a homeless shelter that we work in. So we work with military bases, embassies, and lots of different facilities, but it's really been codified in this homeless shelter that we work in. So our background, 4 generations of contractors. My dad is an engineer. You'll see a picture of him in there. This is my grandpa's tractor. Something that my dad's on top of. We just grew up immersed in this. On the other side is my other grandpa, more service. So we feel like we pull this together, the construction and service. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of my history through 3 photos. On the one here, this is me with Colin Powell. So I spent 5 years in the State Department. We left because, speaking of breaking your heart, one of my children got pretty sick. And so we had to move on to a different career. It's a hard career on families. I became CEO about a year ago. And then after being involved in the business, after I came back. But in this picture, it looks we're like close together for the picture. Well, actually, he's holding me up because I had just come out of an appendix operation. And I was supposed to be providing support as Romania was joining NATO. I couldn't because I was in a Romanian hospital. So I am just grateful to be alive in this photo. We're going to kind of go back to the lessons, especially Romania, and my stints in Romania and then Canberra, Australia. Second photo right here, this is we're using a radar system to provide a internal perimeter inside an airport. And so here we're super excited to be finally getting this thing operational. So I love getting out there in the field. I loved my stint in the State Department, but I also love getting out there, and it's amazing to see things work. And this one here, something I'm really proud of is that we won an award for the most innovative company in Idaho. This is the first time this award had ever been given to a specialty contractor. Super proud of that. In this case, we won the award, and I was really emotional because we had barely made payroll. And we talk about in Procore about keeping these connections with the general contractor. Well, we hadn't been paid for quite a while on a job. And so the less glamorous side of the specialty contractor work is that we hadn't been paid on this side. It was amazing to win, and it was amazing that we had made payroll. So it was great to have that behind us. So a little more about Sloan Security Group. We're a top 5 national in this physical security integrator space. It's a relatively new space. We've been around 28 years. We have a design assist business that's really a global business. We work with helping people design effective physical security, and we'll talk later about what that means. We build, maintain more on the West Coast with Boise and San Jose offices. This right here, we really are a powered by Procore operation. We use Procore, we're heavy users. We're also very proud that we won an award for as one of the best places to work in Idaho. So this is a video about us that tells a little bit about what we do. This is from the Innovation Awards. There's no sound. This is some of the work we did. This is the world's longest barrier system. This is a system we did for one of the embassies, design, build, maintain. Some more examples. This is a model we did of a denial system. You see where we're looking at spacing between these two to make sure we can turn a vehicle around, the model what happens when that vehicle has to leave. So here's the picture from the front. We're over here off to the side, and we're cheering because we hadn't been able to afford all the engineering. So this was an amazing feeling. This is some of our customers we work for. Hensel Phelps, Fleur, Walsh, a lot of the people that are here, the regular agencies. This is our people, so obviously we don't go anywhere without, we have 85 employees, we don't go anywhere without them. This is my dad being inducted into the Hall of Fame at Oregon State and the 4 partners. So our business has really changed over the last bit. And just talking to people, I think this probably mirrors some of the changes that have happened to you. So in the past, we started out with the Missile Defense Program here. In 2006, we went down to the US-Mexico border. That's where that first video is from, the crash video. It's a really lightweight barrier system. We started there about 2006. We left in about 2011. We haven't been back. We started out with a large company that doesn't want to be named in the Bay Area in 2016. And then from there, our business is really divided up into the federal and business space. And this really mimics what's happening right now. As you see, security standards that started out in the federal space have transitioned over into the business space. Looks like we're having, oops. Let's see if that does. There. So given it's hunting season, I want to show a small but non-confidential project. So given that we're going into hunting season, we actually have radar going across the roadway up the North Idaho border. It's triggering lights to alert traffic. And you see this car is slowed down, and you see the elk. In this case, this is an elk that crosses the road, and they go on. One of the really cool, interesting things about this is this was a security system, but in doing this system on the highway up there, we really learned a lot about the roadway. So we started getting this very chaotic accident data that we were able to make some sense of and help them develop better roadways. So I mentioned the the shelter as something that, if you want to break your heart, go to a homeless shelter. But working in this with a small nonprofit that has very little money and absolutely has to provide security in order to keep its mandate of serving its people. This is where, I've relearned a lot about security through serving this company or this nonprofit. One of the things I've learned about security, and this is kind of a big idea, that effective security means keeping open doors open. Now, one of the things we hear about security, we think about it in terms of, hey, all these doors have to be closed. We're going to have rules coming in, people bringing people in this way. But what we did is that if we close the door in the shelter, and this comes into many businesses we serve, if you close the door through misapplication of your technology, that you can't serve the people that you're supposed to serve. And even in the embassy, in order for us to serve the people we had to serve, we had to go to them or find a way to bring them in and to find that, to be able to bring people through that security. A little bit counterintuitive. We can talk about it some more if you want. But again, effective security, keeping doors open. So there's a model in this presentation, which is basically threat, response, impact. Review, then go back to the beginning. Review the threat and see where you're at. So in the big picture here, what we're going to talk about is in building, you typically don't think about why you're building, how you're building, as you're building. In this case, the United States, you're going to see, we've had a fairly dispersed threat environment. And that's changing how we build. Now, the other parts of the world have had a threat environment for a long time. And what we're saying is that a thoughtful security response can equal a more livable city. So effective security, creating security on the streets, can create for a more livable city, and with that, a return on investment, rather than simply a risk reduction. So September 11, do you guys remember where you were on September 11? Yeah, I do. I mean, it's something that's so, as a threat, it's something that became reality. So in our embassy in Romania, we were closed September 9th and 10th. Why? Because they thought it was going to happen there. Now, we don't exactly know why that was the understanding, but we shut down because Embassy Sofia and Bucharest were both thought to be targets at that time. April 19th, 1995. Anybody know what that is? Oklahoma City.
20 years ago Sunday, Timothy McVeigh parked a rental truck right here. At 9:02 a.m., it exploded.
We're covering an explosion in downtown Oklahoma City this morning.
We were trapped, we were buried, but we didn't really know it.
Over there, right behind me, was where the building blew up. About, 168 people were killed. And that's a lot.
Now there are just chairs.
And the little kids have the little chairs for them, and then the grown-ups have the bigger chairs.
When the north wall of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was blown off, 19 of the 168 victims were young children in the building's daycare center.
That's Oklahoma City. That's really what shaped our industry. And one of the things you'll see is that these building and how we change, it takes time. And that is this is your first, and then the World Trade Center before that, and then Oklahoma City. Has anyone been to the memorial site, Oklahoma City? Have you been there? It's an amazing place to see the reflection pond. Now we remember 9/11, and definitely we don't want to forget that. But Oklahoma City with the daycare right by the bomb, and to see the magnitude of basically a third of a building being destroyed instantly. And that has really impacted our industry. It's impacted how we build. It's impacted how we go about our setbacks and speeds, all the facets of how we build as an industry. So if you look at kind of a map of the world, this is you're looking at intensity of terrorism across the world. This right here, anybody know what that is? That's Peru. So I was there when and there is no connection between me and being there and the Sendero Luminoso taking over the Japanese embassy. But I was there at about the same time. I was there the day after they took over, and then I left the day before they left. They let the hostages go. Anybody know what this island is? Where this red spot right there? Sri Lanka. Yeah, the original. This is the modern, really the origins of modern terrorism. You can say there's a number of different places that are modern terrorism, but you have Sri Lanka right here. You have increasingly in Africa, your usual, well, it's become usual, unfortunately, here in the Middle East. You see Europe has got fairly dense population everywhere except here. That's Romania. And one of the things that Romania is very good at shutting doors. So locking down, it's been authoritarian. They have an amazing intelligence apparatus. But in post 9/11, we really had to learn from the Romanians and how to do some of the, especially on the airport security. And then you see here, in going back to the US, that we have a fairly dispersed set of terrorist attacks. So terrorist incidents worldwide. You see the numbers? So the odds of being involved in a terrorist incident, because I don't want to, my goal is to create order out of chaos. I don't want the purpose is not to scare, but give you information. But what you see worldwide is a tremendous spike in the number of incidents, particularly driven with Afghanistan and in Syria. But your odds of being an incident continue to drop. This is where you're at. Now, of these incidents, who would say, if you were in a business versus a government facility, where would your odds be highest of being in an attack? Any guesses out there? Who would guess government? Who would guess business? Okay, business is right. So most terrorist attacks happen in businesses. Even though the standards start off on the government side, it's really been the businesses that have borne the brunt. The United States' first vehicle bomb, 1921, Wall Street. Again, business as a target. 35 casualties, 35 killed. It was a horse-drawn wagon that had a bomb in the back. And interesting, if you look back at this period, this was an Italian anarchist group. They never found out who exactly did it. But if you look at this period, you had two different types of attacks. You had bombs, and you had assassinations. So here we have kind of moving more to the vehicle-based attacks. We just had one yesterday in Germany. This continues. Why? It's easy. They're easy to carry out. There's a number of reasons, but the ease of carrying out a vehicle attack continues to get, it's easy. Everything is right there. One of the things you have is, right now, actually kind of going back a little bit, if you look at pipe bombs to the 1,000 or so that happen, most of them misfire. The technical capacity, even though YouTube videos and everything will show how to do a bomb, most people don't have the patience or capacity to carry effectively one of those attacks out. So there's a number of so we're taking all these different risks, and you guys are involved more on the general construction. We have an owner in the building. So you've got all these risks. So how do you go about structuring what is your threat, actual threat on the building? So this is an NYPD. We work in Bank of Mellon at the World Trade Center. On the design side, and how NYPD works their risk assessment is threat, which is 1 plus actual threats, vulnerability, meaning people coming in and out, vehicles coming in and out, and third, impact. So then you go high, medium, low impact. I know I'm rushing through this, but any guess as to what it takes to be considered a high impact target on a financial impact? It's $10 billion. in NYC terms, to be considered a high impact target. Most buildings, and using this terminology, are pretty low risk sites. So there's another type of risk assessment based on FEMA 452, which is easy to do a Google search on 452, and then you'll see some of this applied. And basically this goes to weapon access. So I was a part of two, not one, I think I'm one of the very few people in the world that were a part of two anthrax incidents. So in Embassy Bucharest, we had one anthrax incident, and then when I went to Canberra, Australia, we had another one there. And I was the lucky person that actually got to open up some of the suspect packages. That's what they do when the people that you're kind of on the bottom of the totem pole. So here we have weapon access. So some of the issues we have weapons, it'll depend from site to site. Expertise. You know, one of the big concerns with Iraq, Afghanistan isn't necessarily just the fighting happening there, but the fact is that you're training a whole generation of people to how to use small arms tactics, how to use bombs, how to use these different techniques that you perfect on the battlefield. So it's not just what's happening in Syria, it's what's being learned in Syria. Site threat history. Obviously you have this, you've got the World Trade Center, has a long history of threats. Interesting enough, threats, and then our next one, site visibility and symbol, is that more you invest in cutting edge architecture, the more likely you are to be considered as have status and therefore a target. So the irony of the thing that makes a building special may actually work against it as a target. Going over to site access, do you have people coming and going? That kind of goes into site population. Do you have 1,000 people coming in versus 500 or 100? It really changes what the threat level is with that. And then finally, collateral damages are just particularly related to maybe gas lines, transportation lines, what other damage can come out of this. So taking that, because your x-axis kind of going down the y-axis, you can break this down by site, as in kind of a bigger picture. This is in general address. A particular part of the address, like could be the data center in this case, or you could have it as a particular room, like it could be the lobby. So you're taking the same, going down. These are just 5 examples of 5 different types of risks: active shooter, vehicle-based explosives, chemical, biological, cyber. Now, interestingly, these different ones go in waves. So anthrax, we haven't had a lot of anthrax as a threat recently. It just hasn't been on the radar. Likely, at some point, a derivative of it will come back. People tend to be, we heard earlier in the IT security world about copycat viruses. Well, what people tend to copy other people's techniques. People aren't that original. So going into this, cyber at the bottom is certainly becoming a threat. If you don't have a cybersecurity program, likely you will have one in the near future. In fact, we actually talked earlier in an earlier class about whether cyber construction maybe split into people that had cybersecurity and those that didn't. So taking all this threat ID requires building bridges. So if you look at this, while you can put it on paper, you can build walls, you can identify it, you can plan for it, but it's really the communication side, whether you're on the cyber shooter. If you look at about 60% of the mass shootings that have happened in the US, and I don't want to talk too much about that part, but one of the commonalities you have is that someone knew. And so the security manager as the communication broker, making sure you had that. And again, Bucharest, in that time was a very unsettled environment. We needed to make sure we had good connection within the law enforcement community, and then your community at large, to make sure that we understood the community we were part of. So this goes to response. So effective design. So we are increasingly being brought in to help general contractors make sure that we've got good security design. It saves time, it saves money, it saves lives, and ultimately, if done right, saves or helps communities. Now we're helping undo some really expensive results of poorly done security that ultimately doesn't meet standard. But in this process, like almost all parts of construction, you're constantly on a balancing act. You've got cost, you've got schedule, you've got convenience. When you have convenience and security becomes inconvenient, usually the convenience side wins. It's really hard to go against that. One of the issues we have, and just kind of take you down to the homeless shelter, one of the issues we had is these people coming in to the shelter, and they're in the wintertime, and they're fully clothed. They have every layer of clothing, and we're looking for drugs, guns, weapons, all different types of paraphernalia that could hurt other people. And so one of the things that we had to do was make sure that the access control part, that we made sure that we could make it convenient for them to effectively disrobe at least half of the clothing that they had, because often they're wearing countless layers of clothing. So when you're working with the security side, it's these inconvenience, friction points that become real important pieces. How do you bring in vehicles? How do you bring in people? How do you do it in a timely manner? Finally, aesthetics and functionality, there's lots of ways of doing that. That's really a good creative piece that we're going to get into later. An item I want to talk just briefly here is safety and security. We don't oftentimes think of security and safety at odds, but they can be. Now you saw the video of the car being denied at that access control point. That's a security point that, if not done right, can be a safety. You've got to separate out pedestrians from especially these new class of barrier systems to bring vehicles in and out of facilities. So we're going into this design-wise, we're quantifying threat, we're mitigating threat, and then we're designing the measures behind that. So quantifying, so this is really looking at how fast can a vehicle go, what's your maximum speed of approach into a building, at a building, and then what's your standoff distance. So how far away can you push that vehicle? These are some example of some urban landscapes, using creative ways of integrating security into your landscape. This is a field that is really developing quickly as people are getting tired of the bollard systems that you see. And you see some really creative uses of stem walls and bollard systems and street furniture to maximize your standoff. So here's some other concepts. And then here what we have is looking at, and this is where a lot of the architecture creativity is really towards how do you move people around a building? How do you create new public spaces? How do you create a more interesting landscape? We heard about creating a sense of place. This is where security and creating a sense of place start meeting. So designing, this is where the precision and just making sure that you're getting good pedestrian flow, you're not creating new dangers. This is where this piece comes into. So we're going to go back to this video. This is an example of this site, which is actually a media. It's down in LA, and they're looking at bringing buses and different vehicles into this. One of the things we found is that they could not bring limousines in, which was the key reason for this entrance. They didn't have enough space to bring a limousine, and by moving these bollards slightly, that we were able to give them enough space to get that limousine to turn around, which was the biggest vehicle they had. Otherwise, they would have had to back everyone back through the entrance in order to get that one vehicle out, creating additional safety and security hazards. So this is so if you're taking pictures, this is probably an important, item for design. So starting here with your ASTMs, this has become the new focus on crash barrier systems, and it includes the size of the vehicle and what the penetration distance is. What we see is that people get confused between the old Department of State K ratings and the ASTM ratings. And what happens is the Department of State ratings tend to be very expensive, but these tend to be older systems that are tried and true systems. ASTM rated systems tend to be a bit newer. We've got European standards. We've got some gate access control standards. There's some really good FEMA work on giving some building risk mitigation for both incidents. Example, seismic and a lot of your blast mitigation work are very similar. And then you have some US Corps of Engineers has some access control standards. A lot of times, one of the issues we see is that architects simply are not aware of the standards that are out there in order to build the building to meet whatever code is appropriate. So here's one of the random crash videos. This is one of ours. We're testing an engineered system that's meant to be so a typical security response. So we're looking at curb bollards, blast-resistant facade, automated gates to let people in, and then seismic upgrades. So you may combine the seismic upgrades with your bollards, your glass, maybe new glass particularly, to create your security response. So some tips for getting your security project off the ground, getting input and alignment from stakeholders. One of the challenging parts of security is that likely someone that is not you and someone that is not the owner owns part of the security. So if you look at a building and you want to push that perimeter as far as you can to get that offset distance from the building, you're going to have to go to the city or someone else that owns that space to get them on board. And one of the things that takes time to expand that perimeter as far as you can, even if it's just a bollard, because likely you don't own the parking or the sidewalk. Design standards, working to a design standard, looking at what your speeds are, your offsets need to be, matching that to the building is important. Find similar projects. So if you know of a similar project that is trying to do the same thing, go look at what worked, what didn't work, and the equipment that they used. Finally, what we see a lot of issues with is you start the budget, and the budget is driven by the equipment. And you look at the material, you look at maybe the gate system, the barrier system, the access control, but then you forget that there's actually people need to put that in the ground. You need to maintain the system, someone needs to monitor the system, and you need to have a process for bringing people in and out of facilities. So there's a lot of focus on the equipment, not so much on keeping that equipment operational. Finally, impact. So we've kind of gone the full journey here. So the impact of all of this, of the terrorism, you see that people are building, there's standards. One of the things you see about this is threats change communities. So historically, you see the castle, we built cities to meet threats. You think of it just on an urban planning basis, that the castles, the cool places we go to in Europe and elsewhere, many of them are created by threat. So we have built our cities in the US usually for transportation efficiency. So we're building so we can get people as close to commerce as we can. So what you see is you have this where you had someone built this as probably the castle wall here, and it was oftentimes narrow because of lack of space, but also for internal controls, internal threats as well as external threats. Then here you have a much more sprawled out space. But with all of this, especially with what you see on the public gathering spaces, is that separating cars from people and securing these public spaces and walking spaces makes for more livable cities. What you have is people more ready to walk, more ready to move from without their vehicles. And with this, you start getting more street businesses, you start getting more tourism, you have people walking, which creates a healthier environment, and you create more economic activity. So one of the examples of this, so I was actually in putting this presentation together, I was reached out to different manufacturers and looking at the data on, okay, what does this really show? And it turned out it was actually really hard because a lot of these activities are really early. And if you look at the first one, this is one of the most famous examples of armoring a public space that was owned by vehicles beforehand. So if you look at this is the original space, Times Square, New York. And then here you see, New York is right in the process of doing a kind of an economic activity and what it's done for the city. But you see a much denser, you see much more people. The merchants say that it's much more viable to be a merchant in this area. You have a significant reduction in pedestrian and vehicle accidents in this space. And they intend, and really the proof on this one is really they're intending to expand this throughout New York City. Anybody here from New York City? Okay. So for us as a security side, traditionally, what we've seen is that the investment in security has resulted in reduced risk. And it's hard to put an ROI with that. But the good news is that when you can create a more livable space, kind of place and space making that we heard about earlier, when you can make spaces through and create a security objective as well, it creates an investment. Now there's some numbers on this, and this is also helpful for getting stakeholders on board for those of you that need to say, hey, we need to expand our perimeter, that this equals additional activity. This is a benchmark report that came out that suggested that $1 of investment in livability, which separating vehicles, particularly vehicles from pedestrians, that this equaled a almost $12 return, which us on the security side is pretty exciting because it's hard, traditionally it's been really tough to make that argument. It's when you're making a risk reduction something that isn't happening, as opposed to saying, hey, if we do this right, this is what's going to happen in a positive way. So with this, I'll put it out there for questions. If you want to continue the conversation, I'm happy to take emails or calls.
And I have a mic.
And then this is Greg, and if anyone has a question, we thought we'd pass the mic around. Anyone have questions? Yeah.
Real quick, I don't know if you're
Go ahead.
Do you actually do construction of security features or just consulting?
No, we do. So our core business is where we started was really this constructing security barriers. So we integrate other people's products, oftentimes integrate other people's products. Some we build our own to fill the gaps. But our primary is to build, and then from that, we've developed a design business and a maintenance business. Total life cycle. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Hi. I've, when listening, found some similarities to the elevator industry that I've spent the last 7 years in. And I wondered what the education is to the architect, because I often found they didn't know a lot about the elevator in some cases as well. And I had to bring up to standard, whether it was modernization of the building or a brand new one. And so we did a lot of lunch and learns and teaching, and that also obviously scopes out the project. But is that often what you'll find when working with architects, or how are you educating if they aren't currently aware?
So Greg may be better qualified to talk to this than I am, but I'll take a first stab at it. And the short answer is we work with, as the systems get more complex, we work with the architects to fill in the gaps. And that's a lot of what we do, is to talk about, and it's been really interesting because Bank of Mellon, I believe, began 2 years ago, and we continue to be involved with them on a monthly basis and helping them fill the gaps, and especially in terms of their relationships with other stakeholders. NYPD is very involved because of the site. We fill that gap.
Yeah, and we get a subcontract from the architects to help them with the coming up with the how that, because unless you've dealt with a stadium before and you're dealing or a military site or a big corporate campus or something, you haven't had to try and decipher your vehicle attack speeds before.
Yeah. And along with that, we're doing a lot of, and this is where the building side comes in, where we started at the building, is we're doing a lot of constructability analysis, which the architect will really struggle with. So what you have, if you don't go this process, what you'll have is you basically end up getting designed by submittal. So you're going to the manufacturer to provide you with a set of specs and drawings that may or may not match your site, and may follow one suite of equipment that may not meet your site needs.
There's a lot of design through manufacturers' sales reps, and of course they're designing their own products into the buildings. And on our side of things, on all the automated equipment, we don't have an automated equipment line, so we're able to bring in best of class, something that actually fits that criteria from the 10 or so different barrier manufacturers that are in the United States, and some that come over from Europe too.
Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Do I have a hand over? Nope. So actually, one story I was going to tell with this, actually I want to go back to this piece right here. 4 tips for getting your security project off the ground. We can just leave that up. What kind of a story with this? So one of the things, when you have the threat, and then you have your response, and then you have your impact. So I was going down the road, and one of the things I did was I often acted, so I speak Romanian, I would go with the ambassador to wherever to help translate, help facilitate, and I would go out there and I'd be out. So after 9/11, everything got armored, we had shooters all around us, Romanian Special Forces, and so everything got armored. So you kind of see like today, okay, we've got issues, we're just going to throw weight at it, concrete, and so we're going down the road and we're going really fast. And in Romania, we share the road with a bunch of wagons. So there's a lot of horse-drawn wagons at that time. And we're going down the road 65, and these horse-drawn wagons are going like 6 miles an hour. So I asked the driver, so what happens if we get close? Can we stop? Because the guys with the guns were going straight and fast, and one was in front of us, and one was behind us, and nothing could change. And he's like, well, we've got all this armor, but we forgot to change the brakes. So we can't stop. We're going straight. So that's a lot of analogy for a lot of the security that's happening, is that you're putting a lot of armor in, people are forgetting the brakes.
And how to use it. One of the things we run into a lot is we need a system, we need vehicle barriers, we need gates, we need access control. Who's going to control it, and where are they going to control it from? Who has responsibility for what? A lot of the times we have to ask those questions because nobody's figured that one out. Someone has to push a button somewhere to make this barrier come up. Where are they, and what can they see? And those barriers, the crash test that you saw in there was a 15,000-pound truck at 50 miles an hour. And all the crash barriers are rated less than 1 meter penetration. So people are dead if you're not controlling things right. And that's one of the things that people forget, is this isn't just an inconvenience. If they're there because it's a final denial, is what they call it, and if you hit it, you're dead. And so there was actually a Robin Air Force Base somewhere on the East Coast, an event that happened 2 days ago, I think it was. 3 guys ran a gate. They weren't associated with the military at all. They put the barriers up and it killed all 3 of the guys, but they don't know what they were trying to do. But they ran the guards, and it's a pretty serious business, and if you don't do it right, it can really be unfortunate. There's a lot of investment. A barrier costs, when you put it in the ground, $100,000 to $300,000. And so you don't want to put those in the wrong place or somewhere that the guys are just not going to use them because they're scared of them.
So we just put in some barriers. We're actually just fixing some barriers in downtown San Francisco, and I think that cost is about $250,000 to fix a 6-inch error. Yeah.
So it's a part of the business. It's a part of the building that people don't think about. This morning I drove past the Diamondbacks Stadium over here. There is 0 crash barriers around that building. And that's something that the private industry is now bringing up. All the new stadiums that are getting built are being built with crash barrier standoff expectations. Standoff standards, they're trying to keep that 15,000-pound vehicle full of explosives, which is the standardized test threat vehicle, away from the facility. And there's a lot of retrofits going on. You saw a picture of the Las Vegas Strip on there, all the new arenas. If a NFL stadium is to be eligible for a Super Bowl, it has to have the appropriate level of safety. So all of the new ones, I think the Buccaneers just did like a $500,000 or $500 million retrofit of their perimeter, which included upgraded the security, but all the new Las Vegas Raiders. We just did the Golden State Warriors new basketball arena. Even the basketball arenas downtown, no standoff distance on there. They have to protect the buildings and all the people.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Are you finding that?
Greg, you want to give her the mic, please?
That's okay. I can be loud.
Okay. Your outdoor voice.
Are you finding that schools, whether that's colleges or K through 12 or anything like that, that they're starting to investigate this as something that they're?
So the question is, are schools finding the K through 12?
Or universities or anything else? Because you brought up stadiums, and I can see that. But colleges, I can see that as well. But is that translating down? Are we seeing anything like that?
You know, I mean, just hypothetically, we're not seeing the crash barriers so much on the, like the high school. What you see is kind of like our book of business, how that's developed, where you start out really on the heavy duty DOD, DOJ, your traditional heavy metal folks. And it's really moved into the corporate side and then into the stadium side that Greg spoke to. We keep seeing different people adopt for different reasons. Data centers have typically been heavy users on this. Energy infrastructure is becoming a heavy user of barrier systems, kind of like the heavy, more the government style. So, but you'll see that percolate slowly as people start investing more. I think the next step is really it's really the crowded spaces, public spaces, is putting more time into investing and separating that off from vehicles. One of the things you see, the trend I didn't mention in here, is that if you look at, there's a lot of speculation. When you have terrorists and you have people that are absent-minded drivers, and they're distracted drivers. And right now, we're going the wrong direction on our pedestrian vehicle incidents and casualties. And so I think that separating public spaces off from either a terrorist, someone with ill intent, evil intent, malicious intent, or someone that's simply distracted and has taken a wrong turn. I think it's percolating, it's expanding to, I think, all spaces.
Yeah, I think you don't see it in the smaller schools, in the high schools and stuff, because there's not enough people there. I mean, yeah, it's important, but as far as but that's where you start seeing it in the stadiums, because you got 30, 40, 50,000 people to 100.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, in California, I know they're trying to keep all sorts of things out, but they haven't tried the cars yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just going to take our cars away.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll just turn the power off and you won't be able to plug in and charge up.
What'll happen is you'll get autonomous vehicles, and then you have, that'll be the next kind of the issue, as that percolates through society, it's going to result in a whole bunch of different issues and security issues. Yeah.
So are you finding, I guess, you guys are consulting business to do it, are you finding when you vet different facilities or operations that are coming to be built that they don't need it based on your use the NYPD risk analysis? You find some people that say, hey, guess what, you don't need to go all in on this, you're not going to get a high profile target.
So typically, I would suggest if we're involved in the construction, you should probably go outside for the threat analysis. That's not really that we would work with someone that would do a threat analysis, but just as separation of duties, kind of ethical wise, there should be someone else doing that. There's a lot of people.
You need
more law enforcement. So if you need a threat assessment done, sometimes local PD will do that. NYPD has a whole set of guidelines for that. NEMA has a set of guidelines, and there's a lot of local law enforcement and securities consultants that will do that. What we would help with is then work on the constructability. And that's what you'll see in the stadiums. The stadiums will have somebody do that.
Yeah, usually that starts at the owner and then the architect, and they come up with these concepts and then expectations.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and